Hello, I'm Mike Buchanan, leader of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. Just wanted to talk about tickets. Because this is an online conference, we're in the rather bizarre position of being able to sell tickets to the event after it ends, which tickles me no end. So all the presentations and interviews will be available here until next June. I've just made a decision to put the live Q&A video files onto my party's YouTube channel. Anyway, ticket sales end the 1st of January, so do invite people you know to order a ticket and see some great content. The main videos will not be made publicly available until March at the earliest, possibly even April. My co-host today is Philip Tanzer, the only MRA I know who nobody has a bad word to say about. I've decided it's my obligation to find some MRAs who don't like him and to interview them at length. So if you know anyone who just can't stand Philip for any reason whatsoever, do get in touch with me. Philip's a member of Gender Parity UK, and my interview of him with Elizabeth Hobson will be published at 2 p.m. today, followed by his Q&A. So I look forward to that. Our interviewee today is the wonderful Sally Ann Burris, who heads up Split the Difference. Very interesting initiative. Sally, I wonder if you could just say a few words about yourself before we start the Q&A proper.
Okay, so I run an organisation called Split the Difference, as Michael said. I have worked and delivered services for approximately 30 years now in lots of different ways, under tender procurement, run 2 organisations before this. I've just finished a journalist degree because I wanted to promote the needs of men and boys in all different areas. So we focus on 13 areas. Some of them include the classic areas of family court, mental health, children's services, criminal court, because there's lots of biases. Some of the others are human rights and the gathering of statistical evidence. And the idea is to be able to face the UN, and our main focus is the Istanbul Convention, and we're asking for UN men, but we've got a large drive around suicide prevention for men because it's the outcome of a lot of inequalities that are about throughout all of the legislation. It's not just one piece. I looked at 21 pieces of law in the UK, but I also looked at over 15 countries internationally. And in all of the legislation that we looked at, men didn't have the same voice or ability to thrive as women did. In fact, most of them were invisible. There was some, like education, where men are wrapped up within that, or boys are, but still to a lesser degree in funding and fiscal management and stuff. So that's kind of me, really.
Thank you, Sally. Very interesting. Philip, would you like to kick off the questions?
Yes, of course. The first question comes from Ken, and the question is, the BMJ says divorced man commits 0.7 times more than divorced women do.
Sorry, Philip, you broke up. I don't know if it's my connection there, but I think you said 9.7.
9.7 times more than divorced women do. We know a major driver of suicide is from relationship breakdown. Divorce causes so much trauma related to divorce. What does the app that you're working on do for this cause to suicide?
So one of the outcomes from the app, so the app is designed from, it's a clinical app. So it's designed to look at the neuroscience. It's based on neuroscience and the body's reaction to negative thoughts and processes. So the neuroscience side is that side. But for the purpose of supporting men and boys, the app will gather a massive amount of statistical evidence. The app is built on the interpersonal needs of the man. So, for example, when you go into the app, we'd ask you to talk about all of your most favourite things, the things that relax you, that you like in history. What have you enjoyed the most? What things trigger you to calm and to get your brain into a balanced zone, because your brain is 2 sections of your brain, and we want to get it into a balanced zone. So there's lots of interpersonal things and based on your history. But alongside that, the questions that we'll ask is what triggers you, what upsets you, what makes you feel unsettled or makes you feel like you've got to go and walk or do certain things. So we're getting your negative triggers as well as your positive triggers. Those negative triggers could be things like somebody asking you about your relationship or something like that. It starts off in kind of soft and gentle things, and the people that have completed it will know why they're doing it. So in itself, it's a positive act. That evidence, that the answers to those questions from our perspective will build up a lot of knowledge, a huge amount of knowledge about why men are experiencing the thoughts and feelings that they're experiencing. In terms of relationship breakup, there'll be questions around why are you here today? So there'll be lots of, not just now, but historical, because there's lots of historical issues that can bleed into negative relationships as well. So we envisage that we will have people who are perpetrators of violence or who are struggling in the way their behaviour comes out in this kind of negative behaviours. But we understand that there's a reason for that. So we're looking at the past reasons for that as well, so that we can build up a rich content of knowledge. All of our knowledge will be anonymous. And the only things that we'll take is the normal stuff like age groups, whether you're male or female. The app is not just about men. I can't ethically and my values and ethics can't I can't disrespect that women also suffer and struggle. So when you go into the app, you're going to get men and women. But again, the richness of that data will come from women as well. So we've got the comparisons, the real life comparisons. And then that data then will feed into, we want, along with the app, we want to create a website. The idea for the website is that we will have fact-checked evidence. The little bit of innovative kind of technology that we are going to use is it's a thing called Benford's Law, which is used by the American Tax Office and lots of other scientific investigators for lots of different reasons. And there's a way of checking whether something is truthful or not. But what Benford's Law also does is it can identify where there are bots in place in a technology. So the innovative thing about this piece of technology is the use of Benford's Law as a code to check whether something is true or not true. So by putting all of these risk management checkers in place, we want to then create a website that will gather all of this data and will allow universities, government agencies to be able to access the data. So it's truth-based, fact-checked data. So yeah. I know it's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's where the benefits to men who are experiencing breakups from marriages, the heightened rates of suicide, all of that, that's the benefit that it'll be, because we'll be able to not only be able to work with these guys in a scientific way for their traumas and their upsets, but we'll also be able to, they will also be contributing as well. We know that people who contribute to things are more likely to feel valued in lots of different ways. I mean, the app is really exciting, and I'm praying we raise the funds to be able to do it, because everybody we've talked to have been blown away by what's involved with it. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Could I expand on the topic of relationship breakup and divorce and suicide? I'm not sure how much support there is for women after giving birth. Maybe you could tell me that, Sally. I haven't had children yet, and obviously there is very little support for fathers.
Yes.
But I would assume that there is a lot of support for mothers that is readily available and also communicated for every mother that has given birth.
Yes.
And since the suicide rate and problems with depression and stuff like that are so high after divorce and relationship breakdown, I wonder if there shouldn't be, after every divorce, like a system in place for people that picks up, that says, look, if you struggle with something, here's the number to call. Obviously, there's, as I said, there's almost no support for fathers, which is awful, because I think 1 in 4 fathers or 5 fathers actually also experiences symptoms of postnatal depression. I could have my numbers wrong there, but it's relatively surprisingly high.
Mm.
There should be more support for fathers after the mother gives birth, but there should also be support for people that go through divorce. What's your view on that, Sally?
So I don't know whether I keep talking about this all the time at the moment because it's a wow thing for me and it validates men being dads. Okay, so biologically, when a man becomes a father, his body changes. One of the most major things that can kind of blow people's minds is his testosterone levels will drop. That affects the neural pathways in his brain. The only difference, maybe it's my body's changed, therefore I have more rights. So that you know, that kind of sales pitch that you often hear out in the world, it does change a woman's body. She does have the pain and the struggle of carrying that child. And I've had 4 kids. I know what that's about. But we only now know the effects that a man becoming a dad has. His testosterone levels will never go up. Once he becomes a dad, that never goes back. It always stays the same. It changes whether he's an adoptive father or whether he's even somebody who's considering taking in children from social services and taking care of children part-time. The same physical effect happens. So when men become fathers, and we know that one of the greatest challenges is births, deaths, marriages, divorces, and moving home. They're the top mental health challenges in the world. So we know that. So I mean, to me, it's absolutely criminal. When you know that fact, it's absolutely criminal when men go through things like divorce and they separate, that the instant reaction is normally the children will stay with the mother. So not having support through the whole process is a bit like taking a woman's children off her and leaving her in that situation. Now, the most of society will say that's barbaric, you know, and that should never happen. Now, we know that physically, mentally, emotionally, a man changes exactly the same as a woman. The only difference between a man and a woman is that a man's has a heightened rate of protection. So as soon as he knows he's going to be a dad, his psychological effects to protection become more heightened. So his hearing will become increased. A father, they've done psychological tests where they sit a woman and a man in a room with a 2-week-old baby and 10 other children crying, and the man will choose his baby's cries identical to the woman. So there's no difference. And all of the tests have shown us that. So in answer to your question, I actually think that when people separate, there should be a service that allows both people to do that in harmony, because when something like that happens, you experience the death causes a catalyst of emotions and feelings, and it's a process we have to work through. The same thing happens when divorce happens. Yeah. It's the death of dreams and hopes and, you know, your aspirations for your family. It's a death. There's processes that you have to go through. So in answer to your question, absolutely. And I think that in all areas of life, men should be treated exactly the same. Currently, they're not. In mental health, physical health services, when a woman gives birth to a child, as soon as she starts feeling these hormonal changes that the man is going through as well, the fears, you know, the things about, oh God, I've got somebody that I'm responsible for now. What about money? What about food? What about if I die? You know, what happens to me and them? You know, all of that is exactly the same. It's identical. Yeah. So long answer, short question, sorry.
Yeah, I didn't know that men's as well as women's hearing improves.
Yeah.
Really, it's just another example of how the patriarchy fails. I mean, ideally, for men would go deaf, wouldn't they? At that point, rather than be woken up by this bloody kid at 2 o'clock in the morning. But there we go.
You don't get away with nothing. It's exactly the same.
I think we should have taxpayer funded earplugs for new fathers. That's all I can say. I mean, you know, yes, one person needs to be woken up by the baby, but it doesn't need to be him, for God's sake. Anyway,
I know it's dreadful. There's equality for you, Mike.
We have this from Tom Chadwick. The Samaritans have a high-profile suicide prevention campaign on the railways directed specifically towards helping men and boys. It's called Real People, Real Stories. Are you aware of this campaign and what do you think of it? Now, just before you answer that, Sally, Tom provides a link to it on the Samaritans website. I wonder if you could post that in the chat stream, please, Tom, so that people can check it out.
Mike, if you want to, I could the website on the screen. Do you want me to do that?
That's perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Philip.
No problem.
You youngsters are so good at the tech.
Oh, sorry. You have to enable me to share the screen.
No, that's okay. I see it's appeared in the chat. It's appeared in the chat stream.
Okay, so to answer the question, that's amazing, Tom, because when we were filming the advert that's gone on to UK TV, we met with Network Rail and we had a conversation with them because the film crew wanted to film on the railway. There was a lot around male suicide and certain environments, and we had a long conversation with Network Rail and they agreed that we could film on there. We didn't in the end use the footage, but they agreed that we could do that. When we met with their hierarchy to do this, who were also filming and were also running a campaign that they were using posters for, and they were releasing tannoy messages, but that campaign was directed at women and girls. It wasn't directed at men and boys. So, and in all honesty, I got really upset and I thought, why? I don't understand. I mean, we always say 85% of our work is for men and boys. 15% of our work is to include women and girls. And I think everybody who works for a specific gender should do that. Always be mindful. And when I hear this, to be completely honest, I stopped looking at the site and stopped looking at their work because I was really upset. I thought, I don't understand why you would separate something like this. It's just wrong. So you've given me a really nice surprise, actually. How do I feel about that? I think it's amazing. But
I've got to say, I'm surprised as well, Sally. Yeah. I hadn't heard of this.
No.
I mean, on most Samaritans posters I've seen, it's been women,
yes,
rather than men. And I'm also reminded of something that I see quite often in my hometown of Bedford, but I suppose it's everywhere. Posters about children being abused. It's both boys and girls, but every single time the reference is to a male abuser. I've never ever seen one that alludes even to the possibility of sexual abuse by a woman.
I know.
I think with 2 children in the last 2 weeks being murdered by female perpetrators, I think that the jack is out of the box now. I think that did open the conversation because it was quite horrific. In regards to the Samaritans, I think it's wonderful that they have a male. And I think each one of us should send them an email thanking them. And I think our organizations should publish that good work. We should share it on Twitter and encourage people to send them encouraging emails, because when they do something wrong, they have to be held accountable. But if they do something good, they need to be lauded and it needs to be communicated, because otherwise we can't blame them for not doing any more in the future.
No, but they are an example. It's worth. I mean, they are the organization that everyone knows about, and many years ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, I contacted them asking for a meeting at their head office in Surrey, and they point blank refused to meet with me.
Yeah, I know.
They're like quite a number of charities. Very dominant. I mean, I think they had a female chief executive at the time. I don't know if that's still the case. Almost all the senior staff were women, and it's a bit like the Prison Reform Trust. You know, only 5% of prisoners are women, and it's declining because the government wants to close women's prisons. And yet they obsess relentlessly about that 5%. They really couldn't. They even come up with complete crap about how how women are discriminated against in the courts, whereas
Yeah.
we see them all the time. Anyway, that's a tangent.
I mean, when we were preparing to do this suicide prevention campaign, we did lots of research. So we'd already started a mapping exercise across the whole of the UK, and we then found some of the agencies that we'd looked at that were supporting men. We contacted them to see whether they were the type of agency that could cope with suicide ideology, whether they were already doing that. Samaritans were one of them. We also asked for stats because we wanted to look at UK stats in real time with agencies that were on the ground working with guys and women. It didn't really matter who, but we were looking for ground there. They refused to give us their stats. And when we started filming this the planning for this was about 6 months ago. And I'm very, very surprised, Tom, because like I said, we had high meetings with Network Rail, and it was all the posters were about women and girls, because they were working on the narrative for their platform, the tannoys they use on the platform. They were working on the narrative and inside the trains, and they said it was a focus on women and girls. So I don't know whether there's no dates on this campaign. I mean, if they've heard what we're doing, because we did contact them about this back about, I would say 9 or 10 months ago, asking them for stats, whether it's motivated them to do something, I don't know. If it has, brilliant. If they had it in their head anyway, brilliant, because we want to see a change. So yeah, I'm surprised is the answer to that one. I'm surprised, but great, as long as they follow through. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't share their stats and their evidence. They wouldn't allow us to put a link on our website to lead people to them.
That's appalling.
I know. I mean, I'm used to it because I've worked in this world a long time delivering frontline services, so I'm kind of used to it. But I mean, we're not a competitor for these services. I mean, the reason we're trying to create an app is because there's no way on this planet everybody can reach everybody. And the app can be international. And for me, it's just about, I don't want anybody committing suicide. Suicide ideation is literally moments in time in a lifespan. And those moments might go on a year, but it's still only a moment in time. And for me, I know we can't deliver services that will cover a year, but we can create an amazing app that will divert. And maybe in those, I mean, the idea is that from the data that we would collect anonymously, that countries would actually know where to spend money. They would know what the triggers are and why they're there, and then they can choose to work for that, not just for men, but for women, for everybody. So yeah, so thanks for sharing that, Tom.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to move on to the next question, and the question is from Sean. The question is very interesting. It's a religious question. Okay. Can you on the question of faith? In Roman times, suicide was honorable. Pagan faith elevated it, but Christianity abhors it, as Hamlet's famous "to be or not to be" reminds us. Has society lost faith in man? Can we understand suicide as an artifact of faithlessness?
I think it's I mean, obviously I'm Muslim, and one of the things that stats tell us is it's the largest growing faith practice that there is in the world. In actual fact, something very, very interesting the highest rate of people who are converting to Islam is actually young women between the ages of 18 and 26, which is a bit of a wow to me, considering, we want these women who are breaking out, whereas, to worship the way I do, or believe the way I do, we respect ourselves and our body, and we expect other people to respect us as well. But in terms of suicide goes against a kind of most faiths. It's normally a societal thing. I mean, personally, I wouldn't agree that, it should ever be a faith-based choice. It's not allowed, even in Islam. The stuff you read in the media is actually wrong. About people who take the suicide bombers and the rest of it is actually wrong. That's a media-based explanation. I mean, suicide is one of the things that every human being experiences, it is very rare for somebody to not consider it as a choice. It has an emotional value to your life and the experiences you're going through. Spiritual belief systems tell you no, that's it. I've looked at Judaism, Buddhism, Christianity, Catholicism, and obviously Islam, and no faith will sanction suicide. It's just forbidden. I don't really know how to add to that.
So it should be a protector against suicide. Is that what you're saying?
It should be. I mean, the ethics and the values in all religion is that life is a lesson, it's an education, and it's a test. You know, it's a test to whether you can understand why you're here, how you matter to other people, and what your experiences are. So things like patience, tolerance, you know, things like growing your own wisdom, understanding yourself, who you are in this world and who other people are to you and who you are to other people, you know. So your faith should be a boundary to know that and understand that. And that's why it says you cannot commit suicide, because then you are cutting this short. You know, most people, I'm a therapist. My first qualification is in psychotherapy. So I've worked as a therapist, a clinician in lots of different areas, drug and alcohol, you know, lots of mental health trauma, stuff like that. All the people that I've ever worked with, when we work through their sessions, the end product is, what have you learned from the experiences that you've had? And if you get people to understand that the experience they've had has brought them an understanding in what's bad in this world, who they are in this world, how they can progress through their trauma, and what the lessons they've learned from that. They often say, you know, I mean, depression, you know, I'm depressed. It's very fashionable and sexy to be depressed at the moment. All our famous influencers talk about depression and being down and all of this. It's kind of almost a trend. Depression is seen and it's horrendous when you're going through it. It's absolutely awful. But as long as you don't get stuck in it, the definition of depression really means you are going through a life change. You are going through an experience where you by the time you get through the other side, if you're not stuck in the middle, you are going to know something more about yourself and more about life. And it is likely that you will get on a different pathway, because that's what depression is change.
Is it fair to say that at the core of suicide and also depression, well, more so suicide, is hopelessness?
It is, yeah.
And I think that faith is the complete opposite. What faith demands of you is actually faith and hope. And I think a lot of people that are struggling with hopelessness can actually find something to hold on to in faith. Would you agree with that, Sally?
I would. There's a few components that are mostly in place when somebody's experiencing suicide ideology. Hopelessness is definitely one of them. Isolation is another one. And there's an internal narrative that locks somebody in a negative thought process, which affects the brain. You know, there's a biological thing that's going on from those thought processes. But the lack of hope is most definitely the strongest one, because hope lets you see there's a journey out of something. Very often people who are locked in that, they can't see the journey out of something. There's lack of hope there for the future.
So Sally, are you aware of any research that shows that faith in reality is a protector against suicide?
There's a lot of research in psychology there, in terms of things like prayer, meditation. There's a lot of clinical experiments and lots of research that's been done on people who take part in this or don't. And it shows there's areas of the brain that are, for example, when you pray, there's an area of the brain that shows up red on a scanner, on an MRI scan. People who don't pray, there's no energy force within that area in the brain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
An interesting comparison would be between countries that are highly religious and countries that are predominantly atheist. If there is a difference in suicide prevalence, I don't know.
I wonder though. Sorry to interrupt, Sally, but I would have a strong suspicion that in countries where there's a strong religious not opposition, what am I saying? There's a big taboo. No, what am I trying to say now? It would bring shame on a family, for example.
Yeah.
My strong
reporting.
suspicion, and I'm thinking here, I mean, Sally can tell me if I'm wrong, but I would think this might be true in traditional Muslim societies, that they would under-record suicide so as to avoid bringing shame on the family. I don't know. Is that?
Yeah, there is one of the areas that we focus on is statistical gathering and evidence. And one of the reasons why I wanted the app in place is because in the Islam community, it's not shame, it's pain. So in some communities, there's the pain that a community will feel from the loss of somebody through suicide is immense. In Islam, like in Japanese, you know, in some of the Asian communities, the shame is a different kind of shame. But in an Islamic community, for example, when somebody, like I've got friends who've just lost a 13-year-old daughter through suicide, the pain that they feel because the belief system says that that child is different with children, actually with adults, but suicide.
So did you say 13 or 30, Sally?
13, 1-3.
1-3. Oh, that's so awful. 13.
Children's suicide is awful, and it's higher than everybody thinks. It really is awful. But you are right, Mike. The thing is about protection of family. And when you've got a strong faith belief, like Muslim belief is, Islamic belief is, the idea is to help the pain, so that it will be about cover. There's a term of covering. So you wrap around a family and you cover, and that happens at a community level as well. So you are very right that the statistics, for whatever reason.
And by covering, Sally, sorry, can you explain? Covering is the wider community doesn't know, for example, why this 13-year-old girl.
It will be about being sensitive to the needs. It will be, there's a thing called, I mean, we're not allowed to backbite in Islam or talk behind people's backs, you know. So there's a thing about respect. And if you're like me and you carry out your faith, you're a practicing Muslim. The idea to cover is to protect, and it's not to talk about somebody behind their back, and it's not to hurt them anymore or cause them any more additional pain than they're already going through. So in terms of Islam, you would cover, which would mean protect and be sensitive to their needs. It's wrapped up in kindness and, you know, lots of other things. But you're right in that the statistical evidence and gathering to protect and be kind may not. So there's this thing about do the public need to know? It's private to the family, you know. So I mean, obviously people may manipulate that, which is wrong. There are good and bad in all societies, and it's wrong. But you're very right, Mike, which is why statistics are one of the 13 areas we look at. So yeah, but Hope and I mean, for the children's app that we want to create, it's currently called Hope and Cope. It will never have the name or a word suicide in it, but it would be about how children can increase their hope when they're in a really bad situation, and how they can build up things inside them to cope with that, you know. And in that, we're trying to look at gaming and lots of things that are current in the market and attractive to children, but which also would contribute to educators. So schools and people that educate and how they can use the app maybe and integrate it in some of their learning. So that's what we're doing with that one. So yeah, sorry.
Could we, I would like to ask a follow-up question from Tom. He had the question about the Samaritans, and his follow-up question is, thanks for your interesting answers. Sally, did Samaritans give a reason for not wanting you to include a link on their website?
They did what lots of people make difficult. So when we contacted them, we said we'd like to publish on the website a link to their website because they're well known across the UK. I mean, we don't necessarily have to have permission to do that, you know. People share links and stuff like that, but it's courtesy, isn't it, for me? It's, you know. So we just said, could we please put a link on your website and give a bit of information about you and all the great work you do? And we were told by the admin we would need to speak to a manager. So we emailed again and said, okay, great, can you please contact us quickly? Then we had no reply. We emailed them again, and they said, oh, sorry, we would need to take this to board. And I said, okay, great. So can you please let me know when you've taken this to board and let us know the answer? We emailed again and we didn't get a reply. And you get to a point where you say, okay, whether it's like because we make we give the reasons, maybe it's COVID, I've worked as a board member, maybe their board is not working, as often as it should, maybe you give lots of reasons. And in the end, I thought, okay, this is obviously something. And previously, about 3 years ago, I'd asked for stats of them. I'd sent emails and asked for stats, specific ones that were board spectrum, and they refused to give it to us. So, and you get to a stage and you think, okay, I haven't got enough time really to keep trying to pursue this. And when is it bad taste for me to continue asking for something they don't want to give me?
And that's why you don't ask, you just do.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Especially because in some of these organizations, the people that actually work in the field are great people, but
exactly.
Then the problem is in the higher ups, and some of these organizations, there are some really wonderful people helping, but if you talk to the CEOs, you get nowhere because they're.
I wonder if we could just. I wonder if at this point, Sally, might bring in the issue of politics. Like most people, I mean, there's hardly anything on the list next to me which interests me more than suicide, and the behaviour of politicians in this area is absolutely appalling, and always has been. When money is made available for research projects, it's never. There's never an interest in looking at it as a gendered issue.
No, I know.
And of course, I mean, it's stating the bloody obvious, but if the female suicide rate was 3.5 times that of men, how many billions of pounds would be devoted to it? And we saw it recently in the absolutely scandalous International Men's Day debate in Parliament. I think there were probably 8 or 9 MPs. One of whom, a man, what's his name, Gary Newlands, I think.
Yes.
An SNP MP said that he started off with saying that he didn't think there should be an International Men's Day, and men's issues should be looked at when all women's issues are sorted out. So, i.e., never. But the female MPs in particular, and this goes back a number of these debates. They always go in for victim blaming. They talk about men. They talk about gender stereotyping. That, I mean, basically they're saying, in fact, one female MP in one of these debates actually said men need to be more like women. Absolutely scandalous. But at the end of the day, I think somebody alluded to the stats. So the background figure, I think, is something like there's the male suicide rate is about 3.5 times bigger than the female suicide rate, but it triples again. The differential triples after exposure to the family courts. And I guess, I mean, it's not just financial destruction. It's more importantly, I think, for most men, would be denial of access to kids. I mean, nobody would be surprised if women were throwing themselves in front of mothers were throwing themselves in front of trains because they couldn't see their kids. And would politicians then be saying that women need to talk more?
I know. I mean,
I just wonder whether you have any comments around all this.
Yeah, I mean, politics is something that is my personal opinion and my professional opinion is that politicians' governance is there to serve all, and where gender is discussed, they should always discuss it side by side, and any action, any reaction to anything that comes out should always be fact-based, evidence-based, checked. And politicians need to remember that no matter who they are or what gender they are there to serve society. And as far as I'm concerned, unless you do that, you shouldn't be in the job that you're doing. It doesn't matter who you are, and that's all there is to it. In regards to suicide, there are funds that are made available, but they are funds that focus, because of the way risk management takes place within certain things like children's services, mental health services, homelessness, all the reasons behind this. Because of all this, the legislation is governed by protecting women and girls. the focus for all the spending tends to be on that. It isn't on men and boys. You are right. 191 countries across the whole world have the highest rate of suicide for men and boys. The youngest documented case of suicide is a 6-year-old, which to me is abhorrent. The four remaining countries are, 3 of them are, the women are slightly higher, not much higher, and 1 is identical. Now, if you're a UN member state and you work with this, you know, I mean, we work on education and health, mental health in the UN. If this was women and girls, you would be looking at this without a doubt. The UN women would be on this as a driver that wouldn't stop. You know, the fact that we haven't got a UN men and there's no representation for men globally is a criminal. You know, it is absolutely criminal. That we've got a UN women, you know, we've got women in each governance, in each country, member state. There is women working for equality, no men working for equality. So men have no representative voice in society at all. And in governance, in all of the governance meetings that I've ever attended at all different levels, men are very quiet in there. And they are, I mean, psychologically, they're predispositioned to protect who are more vulnerable than them anyway. There are triggers that are biological in men to protect who are more vulnerable. So women, for lots of different reasons, historically, physically, are deemed as that, you know. So for me, though, you leave that at the door. If you're an elected member of parliament or you're in any civil servants, you know, I've worked with civil servants who pack this evidence. They only look at women. They don't look at men. They don't even look at the figures, never mind presenting it to whoever the politician they're currently working with. So, I mean, I could get on a box in Hyde Park and talk about this forever. There is no excuse for any politician that doesn't represent society across the board.
I couldn't agree more, Sally. Thank you for that. Well, we had, as I think you know, 3 Conservative MPs due to contribute to this conference. All 3 bailed on us. One said that many issues had been brought to his attention to give him concern about this conference and my political party. But when I invited him to name me even one, he declined to do so. The reality, and Philip Davis has said this a number of times, including at these conferences, that any MP who wishes who aspires to ministerial office cannot speak on men's issues, cannot criticize feminists. And it's one of the reasons that the MP's bailing, it's one of the reasons that I finally decided that next year we're going to relaunch this party as one, focusing on pro-family, pro-children, pro-life, and attempting to duplicate essentially the same strategy that Nigel Farage did to deliver Brexit. These politicians will not engage. They might meet and talk and so on, but we've had 50 years of men's and boys' rights being assaulted, and the politicians are not going to do anything about it. So they have to be forced at the ballot box. That's the only. I do not know of an alternative strategy which has a snowflake's chance in hell, quite frankly.
We're seeing a shift and change in support of whole families. We're seeing, I mean, in terms of professionals, across the board, across the world, I'm seeing professional psychologists, psychotherapists, sociologists. I'm seeing police, judicial systems. I'm seeing professionals now and researchers contributing and starting projects that look at men and men's needs in comparison to women's, which is really great. I'm seeing people standing up and having a voice for men. And they're people that are learned people. I don't want to dismiss the ground level voice of people in communities, but these are people who have the potential to influence other people. And they're doing that from a positive perspective, which is amazing. In each society...
Do you not think, Sally, sorry to interrupt, but that's a really important point. My hunch is that for every person who fits that mold, there'll be 1,000 professional feminists taking the complete opposite. It's just a huge mismatch.
I agree, but Mike, you're doing something now. You're saying that you're going to reframe and focus on what is real, which is family and children, okay, next generation stuff. That's amazing. 6 years ago, I wasn't seeing this in professionals, even though I know that, you know, the men's movement was alive then, it's been alive a long time. I wasn't seeing it in this arena. You know, we all know that academia influences governments. I mean, anytime the Welsh Government wants to do anything, the first thing they do is approach all the universities in Wales. That's the first thing they do.
And approach Women's Aid in the case of.
Well, I mean, they do. But yeah, sorry.
Can I interrupt you, because there are two more questions?
Yes. Yeah.
We'll be running out of time, and
yeah. Please, you're
very important.
Yes.
Ken is asking, I know you explained the narrative point in your talk, but can you try to explain it clearly here? I found it hard to follow with my 2 brain cells. I'm sure you have more than 2 brain cells. I'm pretty sure you have at least 3. And yeah, he would actually like to help, but he needs to understand what it is. Tell us what the narrative point is.
Okay, so Ken, I am a visual learner, which is why I want to create these 2 videos, okay, to show how this plays out in real form, because I'm visual. So the idea is, obviously I'm a psychotherapist, I work with psychologists and trauma therapists, this is what we're doing, okay, but the idea is that there is a fear around suicide, okay, there's a fear. Most people, the people who want to rule the world with solving other people's problems will always say, oh, you've got to be really careful. In actual fact, that's not true. So we created a narrative that just allows somebody who's locked in, okay, somebody who's locked in and doesn't feel they can reach out. Just to give you a little bit of brief background, but I will keep it quick. When somebody's experiencing suicide ideology, they become very locked in their internal narrative. They have an internal discussion that goes on, all right? And that discussion is about looking for permissions to act, either permissions to do this or permissions to not do it. Okay, so that's the narrative. And there's lots of feelings and emotions and isolations in that. That locks somebody in to the point where it's a bit like putting 5 overcoats on. So the first narrative is, you know, I've experienced this, nobody cares about me, I feel unloved, I don't feel respected, I feel like there's no point in me being here. There's one overcoat. The second overcoat that comes on to lock it in will be, I've got nobody to talk to, there's nowhere I can turn, I've got no information, what will happen to me, you know, there's nobody else out there, another overcoat, right? So all the time, these are the permissions to take somebody's decision to take their own life. And it becomes more and more and more layered, until in the end, all of this stuff, where do you say one word to unlock it all, right? It's very hard, all right, to do it. So the first thing was to give somebody just one sentence. It's a very simple sentence that says, I'm on 1%, I need to press save, which means all of this is going on inside someone. And it's too much to formulate the why. Why, what, where, when, how, is too much, you know, just to put that into another sentence. Sometimes to literally, when I created this, it was like somebody cutting from here to here. We have 2 brains, whether you know this or not. We have this brain and we have the brain that sits within our stomach and our heart, okay? So for me, it was about just opening that up for one sentence. I'm on 1%, I need to press save. You are telling somebody, this is the zone I'm in, right? Because after that, if the other person, even if the other person says, I don't understand or whatever, then at least they've externalized something. They've done it for themselves, if not anybody else. The best response for somebody who's not a clinical psychologist, a trauma therapist, or a professional that can help you, the best response is, okay, I hear you, I understand, what can I do to help? Because to be honest with you, all somebody needs at the first stage is to have a response that's saying, I hear you, okay, I hear you, and I'm here right now, in this moment in time, I am with you. What do you need? I might not be able to give you everything you need, but I'm hearing you and I'm listening, you know? And the response after that might be, okay, so listen, I get it. Just talk to somebody who can help, because there are people out there, you know? You know, there's a saying that, you know, the the barman. Everybody knows the barman, where the guy rocks up and he sits at the bar and he has one drink and he just splurges. I mean, everything's going on in that day. I am told that barbershops are the same. What goes on in the barbershop stays in the barbershop, I am told. You know, the barbershop's the same. And I've spoken to barbers. So
I think that the destruction of male spaces has a lot to account for in regards to decline of male mental health. And I've traveled to I traveled to Muslim countries a couple of times, and there you have the cafe culture where it's just men having coffee together, talking to each other. And in the past, it was much more common for men to sit on the bar and, as you said, talk to the bartender, and barber shops. And I think that was crucial for their mental health, just like it is crucial for women to have safe spaces where they can share a little example. I thought that was fascinating, and it ties in a conversation that we had before this Q&A started about saunas. I was in a sauna in Germany, a beautiful big sauna, and me and my best friend, we went into the sauna and we talked to each other, and then this young lady walked in, and we immediately lowered our voices. Of course, everything was very polite, nobody would talk, and we're like, oh, where are you from? Oh, yeah. And then there was no conversation, and then a group of 7 guys came in, middle-aged to older, and everybody was very well behaved, very quiet. And then at one point, the young lady got up and she was like, oh, enjoy the rest of your day. And we're like, oh yeah, enjoy. And she left, and there was this sigh of relief, and everybody's like, hey, how's it going? So what are you guys up to? And it changed immediately, and it was due to politeness. We didn't want to bother her with our male loudness, and then it was so relaxed and we can talk about stuff. And you see that as soon as there's a male safe space, and honestly, Sally, I'm sad for you because you can't experience that, but I've been in male safe spaces and the conversations are just amazing, but it takes time.
Yeah, I know.
And need to feel like they're not watched, they're not judged, they can just be themselves, and then they open up.
I know. I agree.
I wonder where I'm sorry, but we're running out of time, so we only have a minute or two left. So we'll give the last question to Sean G.
Okay.
I'd love to see resistance to suicide, contemplating it, then overcoming it, portrayed as heroic. And I'd love to see particular attention paid to the consequences on witnesses, like the police officer you talked about of suicide, something I can barely imagine. Could these ideas help as new ways to combat suicide? And you have 1 minute, Sally.
Oh, you're a man with the same heart as me. I think one of the things that we created the narrative for was to break open the silence for everybody, because what we know for a fact is talking about suicide diminishes, not increases the risk, you know. And the people that we've talked about, the guys on the trains and, you know, all of those things. I mean, what was really interesting, I had multiple meetings with the guy who runs Network Rail, and his job is to take care of the guys who experienced people who jump in front of the trains. And he said that all of the system is set up where all of those guys have counselling, they're very well supported. A lot of them suffer from PTSD. Police talk about PTSD when they've gone to suicide post-suicide, or when they're talking people down. It affects them greatly. And he said that one thing he said to me that resonated was that even though all of the guys get the issues, he's the first man on the scene always, and he's never received, and he does it constantly. You know, he does this constantly, and the effects on everybody is immense. And I agree with you. I think, because for me it was about, you know, you matter. You know, you make a difference. Everybody does. We are all important, and we are all impacted by the effects of suicide. It kills me when I see teenagers who've contemplated or tried. And you're right, it is heroic to step out to that zone and work through it. It really is. You know,
Sally, on that note, I'm going to have to stop because we're very close to the edge. Thank you so much for your fascinating answers. Keep up the great work, and Philip, thank you so much for co-hosting. we have in an hour's time we have a chat. Well, there's going to be the video, and then in an hour, Philip and I will host the Q&A of a very interesting and rather lovely Spanish lady, Valentina Ortiz.
Okay.
And at 3 p.m. today, it's Philip's Q&A. So I look forward to that. And at 5 p.m., Professor Dennis Hayes. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to questioning myself.
Well, I will be there.
So I have to press the button, I'm afraid. So see you all in an hour, I hope.
Thank you. Thank you.
In an hour. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.